Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us, and thank you to Pembina for hosting us here. We're at the Pembina facility on the North Shore of Vancouver, and you can see behind me a giant ship that's loading up with copper concentrate from British Columbia. That ship will be going across to Asia, bringing that copper there, where it'll be turned into various products and shipped around the world. It's an example of the integrated nature of the global economy and British Columbia's contributions to it. There are a lot of workers here that help keep the global economy moving. It supports families. These are good jobs. And it's an example of the kind of work that we're going to expand. You know, we face some pretty serious threats from the United States right now, from the president, in terms of jobs that support families here in British Columbia and right across Canada. This is the site that takes in zinc and lead shipments and sends them down to the smelter and trail, where they're smelted, and they also produce critical minerals like germanium that are essential to U.S. industries like the defense industry. And if they're not purchased from the trail smelter through Teck, then they have to be purchased from Chinese firms. If you're not buying oil and gas from Canada and British Columbia, the alternative is Venezuela. We believe that we are a friend and an ally of the United States with shared values around democracy and human rights. And we've demonstrated that through generations. We want to get back on that track with the president. There's lots that we can work on together. And I am fully supportive of the conversations the Prime Minister is having with the president to try to resolve this unfortunate dispute that will only make families on both sides of the border poorer, that will only compromise prosperity on both sides of the border for Americans and Canadians alike, and will embolden those very countries that the president is trying to target as not playing by the global rule book. I am, you know, I guess over the last 24 hours, as we've gone through this period of retaliating against Americans, and we continue to support that, the absurdity of this, of allies and neighbors hurting each other, has really, I think, come home to many British Columbians and Canadians. I know people are angry and upset, and I'm angry and upset that we're being targeted in this way, and we are going to stand up. We're not going to roll over. We're not going to be the 51st state. And I know that at some point, we're going to get to that state of agreement again with the United States. But in the meantime, our province will be strengthening our domestic economy. We'll be ensuring that we're diversifying our markets around the world. Right now, major firms in British Columbia are in the process of redirecting their critical minerals, their energy products, to markets outside the United States to respond to the tariff threat. This isn't to punish the Americans. This isn't anything else. This is in response to tariffs that have been put on by the United States. And there is just no way that gives Americans more affordable groceries, more prosperous future, more efficient industry. But it is what BC firms will do, and we'll support them in doing that to make sure they're protecting jobs for British Columbians as we diversify our economy across the globe. It's a very serious time for British Columbians. Our government stands with you, stands with all Canadians to push back on this threat. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. We'll go to reporters that are on site and then go to the phones. One question and one follow-up. Press *1 to enter the queue. Please unmute and take yourself off speaker when we call on you so we can hear you. First up, Anaïs.
Anaïs Elboujani with CBC Radio-Canada. Hi, Premier. After the announcement of tariffs pause for Mexico for a month, would you consider putting some measures to rest if the U.S. backs down on their threat? And are you also meeting with PM Trudeau to discuss next steps today before his call at 3 p.m. Eastern Time?
So our hope for these tariffs is for the best, that the president doesn't go ahead with them. There's no question both Americans and Canadians will be better off if the president just moves away from the tariff threat. And I encourage the Prime Minister and I support the Prime Minister in engaging with the President to try to find ways to do that. But let's be honest with ourselves. The deal that Mexico got is a 1-month reprieve. And what we're looking at is the next 4 years of potential threats and tariffs and attacks. And what has changed for so many Canadians is almost overnight is feeling like the Americans are our friends, to feeling like the President is out to get Canada, and in particular, to try to turn us into the 51st state. And if you want to see Canadians, I mean, we have a reputation for being a chill, relaxed, kind of easygoing country. You want to see Canadians get their back up and get some things done, then threaten our sovereignty. And so we're going to make sure that we're never again in the position, certainly British Columbia is going to do this, of being so exposed to the whims of one person in the White House. So many Americans are friends and family, and we have such good relationships with them. But we're not going to take that relationship for granted. We're going to make sure that we have other deep relationships, trading relationships, so that our families are safe. We're transforming our economy to ensure our independence and our sovereignty as a province and as a country.
Do you have a follow-up?
Speeding up natural resources permitting can also, put into question our climate goals and our commitments. John Rustad said, let's take, the climate cap emission out. But what are your, what would you say to people that might worry about our environmental commitments?
We have shared values and priorities with Americans on a host of different issues. There are governors in the United States right now that are close partners with us in the fight on climate change and addressing issues of environmental protection. I think of Washington State, Oregon, and California. And so the unfortunate piece about this is that through these threats, work that we should be doing together and growing our North American economy and reducing our emissions is compromised. And so for us in British Columbia, we keep our values close to our hearts. We want to protect air and water for our kids. We want to make sure we're fighting climate change. But we're for damn sure going to make sure that our sovereignty is protected in this country and that our families are protected and they can pay their rent and they can buy their groceries. And that is our #1 priority, and it always will be.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to the phones. Rob Buffin, CTV News.
Oh, good morning. Thanks for taking my questions. Premier, I guess my first question relates to what further BC might contemplate doing, in response or retaliation. Doug Ford has announced that he is going to ban U.S. companies from bidding on Ontario contracts. He's also canceled the Starlink contract, Elon Musk's company that exists with Ontario. Is there something similar that you would contemplate doing?
Thanks, Rob. We've already issued letters of direction to Crown corporations and across government that for procurement of major projects, and this is literally billions of dollars in spending, that will be focused, that we are prohibiting those contracts going to American firms. We have a trade agreement with the United States that prevented us from putting a rule like that in place. But when the president rips up that trade agreement, says it doesn't apply and puts on 25% tariffs, then the only response for British Columbians can be, for our public money, just like for our money at the grocery store, it's going to go to countries that support and recognize our sovereignty. It's going to go to Canada first, wherever we can, and we're going to ensure that we're doing those things. And so that's already happened. We were actually looking at Starlink for our last mile completions of connection to high-speed internet for rural communities in the province, especially particularly remote and rural communities. We're no longer looking at Starlink. And I think that's unfortunate. That makes everybody worse off. But the reality is that we will not sell out our province to companies that are endorsing and supporting an economic attack on our families. We can't do it. And this isn't a fight we want. We don't want this fight. I hope the President and the Prime Minister come to terms on this as quickly as possible. But the fight has been brought to us, and we're going to stand up for BC.
Rob, do you have a follow-up?
I do. I'm wondering, I guess, about a couple of things. One is Danielle Smith has said in the op-ed piece in the National Post that, you know, in terms of a Team Canada approach, she thinks to protect us from being vulnerable to the states, we need to immediately fast-track building multiple pipelines east and west in the country. I wanted to get your take on, you know, whether you would support seeing pipelines built through BC on a expedited, immediate basis, and also on a sort of related note, what's your views on banning the sale of electricity or imposing export tariffs on electricity from BC to the States?
Well, I'll take your second question first, Rob. In terms of electricity, I mean, the irony is, I don't think that in terms of our electricity customers, that the Americans are very excited about buying BC electricity. They just have to buy it. And if they don't buy it, then the lights go out. And so to put a 10% tariff, which I assume is applying to electricity, we still don't know all the details, on that electricity, it just means the Americans are paying more for the electricity that they have to buy. They're putting a tax on themselves. And so it doesn't require us to do anything else. These things are going to be obvious to Americans immediately when they open their power bills, whether they're industrial customers or residential customers. They're going to be paying 10% more for their electricity overnight starting on Tuesday. That's the absurdity of these tariffs. It doesn't make any sense. They're punishing themselves. And so it's the goal of delivering messages like that. I'll continue to reach out with American media to talk to American consumers. We're going to Washington, D.C. to deliver this message to key decision makers. In terms of pipelines and energy projects, I think that the perspective that we need to take as Canadians for all of our products, this includes businesses and individuals and provinces, all of us, is twofold. One is we need to do a much better job of trading between provinces. You know, we just reached an agreement with Alberta around wine, so that BC wine can flow direct to consumers in Alberta. That is the smallest piece of what we need to do to be trading with Canada first. We need to get rid of all those trade barriers across the country, and that's the instruction my ministers have around the table to work with premiers to do that. The second is, it doesn't matter what the product is, we should be looking at how we get that product to other markets. Now, for pipelines, those projects, even expedited, are going to take years to put in place. Using the infrastructure we have the Trans Mountain Pipeline just down the road here, using it to ensure that we can get those ships to Asian markets and not just to American markets, that we're using the full capacity of these things to ensure our sovereignty is critically important, as well as not just to see this as exclusively an oil and gas issue. This is a Canada issue. All of our products, looking at those other markets around the world where they want our products, is going to be a priority for all of us and certainly for me.
Next, we'll go to Richard Zussman from Global.
Premier Brenda Locke, the Surrey mayor, has asked for a few things from you here. I'm wondering if you would consider an immediate cut to the gas tax, suspending PST on BC-made goods, and to review all other provincial relief measures to address the economic pressures that Surrey's feeling, but all municipalities in Canada are preparing to feel if indeed these tariffs do come into place tomorrow.
Yeah, I welcome the mayor's suggestions. You know, I think that when it comes to addressing these issues, all suggestions are welcome. We have a table with business, with labor leadership, with Indigenous leadership, unified in a way I don't think we've seen before in this province, unified by this threat, identifying those things that the province can do that are going to achieve two goals. One is to support families that are hurt by this, support businesses that are hurt by this, but to do it in a way that grows our economy, that ensures we're protected into the future from threats south of the border, that diversifies our customers, that grows us in a direction of further engagement with the world and less dependence on the United States, given how we've been treated here. And so that's the focus of the table. The focus of the table is on working together in the way that would be most effective. The mayor's suggestions will go into the discussion around the table about how we do that. And I would encourage all mayors to join us in what we did at the provincial level, to identify priority projects in your community that are going to keep people working, get them through your approvals process quickly. It's going to help with housing affordability. It's going to help with industrial and commercial sites. It's going to help with growth in our economy and avoiding delay. You know, I think of the district of North Vancouver, where there's a chlorine plant that also produces byproducts that are going to be used for hydrogen fueling of vehicles, ensuring that they're able to get their permits to operate, that our industry is able to continue working during this time, that our homes are able to get built. That's in municipal government territory, and we'll support them in getting that done too.
Richard, do you have a follow-up?
I do. I see a few members of the NDP caucus have already said they've canceled trips south of the border for spring break. Are you putting an edict or encouragement to those in your caucus and your staff and those who work for government not to travel to the United States at this point? Or what is your general message to British Columbians about travel to the United States, as well as, you know, that continual message around purchasing products that are not manufactured in the United States?
Yeah, no, certainly not an edict. You know, people have family and friends and connections, and there's, you know, for all British Columbians and Canadians, our ties across the border are deep. But what I am doing is saying for all of us, you know, where you have a choice, where there's an option available for you, buy the Canadian product. Do your tourism in Canada instead of in the United States or somewhere else. Help send that message with your dollar. It's an important thing. I want to underline, you know, the Americans are not our enemies. They're friends, they're family, they're people we know and love. This is a decision that's been made out of the White House, and maintaining those connections and those relationships will be important for the long term. But in the short term, using your dollar to send that message is an important thing.
Up next, we'll go to Alec Lazenby of Vancouver Sun.
Premier, I just wanted to ask, in terms of the supports for businesses, I know many businesses rely incredibly on trade with the United States, 54% of our total exports. What are you looking at in terms of supports, and you know, how does this compare to, you know, a COVID era level of support from the government?
Thanks. You know, I think that for me, the comparison with the COVID response is really about how. When I think about what we did really well during that response, it was about getting rid of a bunch of the red tape that slowed down restaurants and threatened their businesses around things like being able to provide drinks, you know, or to be able to buy liquor at wholesale prices or other pieces like that. Those changes that we made became permanent. The patios that were open, those kinds of things. That's a very simple and a kind of hospitality-focused example. But I think we can bring that perspective to heavy industry, to the energy sector, to our mining sector, to the major export products that we have, like timber in British Columbia, where we can use this moment to speed up and ensure we're maintaining those high standards that we have, but to work together, labor, First Nations, industry, government, to speed things up and recognize this threat to our sovereignty and use this moment to cut through a bunch of the challenges that have really stymied us in the past and get things moving, grow our economy, and come out the other end of this stronger. COVID was a lot about sending individual supports to people because everyone was universally affected. It'll be different here. We're less trade exposed than other provinces. Not everybody works in an affected industry, but we're all in this together. And when we're all in this together, that means doing the work that we need to do to grow our economy, keep people working, address that red tape, and really focus our minds on the threat to our country and our province that this presents, and come out the other end stronger, more independent, and a more sovereign country.
Alec, do you have a follow-up?
Maybe I'll just wait for the aircraft to go overhead. But in terms of a follow-up, I just wanted to ask about, you know, obviously only 54% of our trade goes to the United States, but in terms of our trade offices, reopening those up, diversifying trade, what are the opportunities there, and how much realistically can we change our exports in terms of the location that it's going?
Yeah, thanks, Alec. I think the word that I see used the most often to describe what's happening right now around trade is an historic reordering. This is an historic shift in global trading patterns that British Columbia will not be left out of. The United States has made a set of decisions through their president that they want to be more isolated, that they don't want products from Canada, that they're going to punish Canada even though we're a close friend and ally. And the president has also made it clear that this is just the start. There's Mexico, there's the EU, there's the UK. He is coming after those countries as well. And so with that happening, it is also causing those countries and those unions to have a look at their trading relationships. It is an opportunity for us to build allyship and partnership with these other affected countries around trade flows. We have been working to diversify our trade relationships. We opened new trade offices in Taiwan and the Philippines and Vietnam in just the last 18 months. And we're going to continue to do that work. There is unlimited potential. We have what the world needs here. That copper ship that's loading up behind us, copper is needed around the world. The decisions being made by BC companies right now that export to the United States isn't to shut down, it's to redirect those critically required materials to other markets, which comes at the expense of Americans. So it doesn't make any sense why Americans are punishing themselves, but in terms of Canadians, we'll link arms with those other affected countries, we'll deepen our trade, we have what the world needs, we have the confidence to do it, and we're going to do it.
And for our last question, we're going to go to Brenna Owen from the Canadian Press.
Thank you so much. Premier, what can you say about how these tariffs are going to hit the forest and lumber industry specifically, given existing duties? And what does that mean for the effort to rebuild LA after the wildfires?
Thanks. Great question. You know, in the United States right now, for any construction that uses wood, at least 1 out of 5, and in some cases 1 out of 4 sticks of lumber comes from Canada. And I've heard the president say he doesn't need our lumber, and that's technically true. But in order to do that, they'd have to open up state forests down the west coast of the United States for logging. And I don't know why they would do that when they have a partner here in Canada that's willing and able to provide the timber that they need, that can do it in a cost-effective way, even with softwood lumber duties that they put on us, billions of dollars taken from Canada, put into a bank account that's just sitting there because the tariffs are under dispute. The timber industry is going to be hurt very badly, and they're the sector I'm concerned about. A lot of sectors in our province and in our country hit by these tariffs, but the families that are dependent on the forestry sector, I'm worried about the most. This is a sector hit by forest fire, pine beetle, by serious issues related to the softwood lumber duties that almost doubled in the last 12 months, and now facing an additional 25% tariff. It's going to make home building more expensive in the U.S. It's going to make it more expensive for LA to rebuild, certainly at a time of increased demand, but right across the United States. It's going to hurt families on both sides of the border, and it doesn't make any sense. We'll support the forest sector through this. We'll support families through this. But again, this is a sector that is asking for and is going to receive our support in restructuring to be able to respond to this new reality, to access those new markets, and to ensure sustainable forest jobs into the future.
Brenna, do you have a follow-up?
Sure, thank you. Premier, you mentioned that minerals and other products are being redirected. Just looking for a little bit more details on how quickly can that pivoting actually happen for these exports?
Yeah, I've talked to leadership of major mining companies and refining companies in the province, and they say very clearly, and they've said so publicly, that in terms of their operations, their pivot is to redirect their commodity materials, things like aluminum, copper, wherever they have access to tidewater to get things out, they're redirecting to other markets that are not tariffing. And they take no joy in that. It is painful for them logistically to be able to make those shifts, but they are making those shifts because they have to. And that materially, over the short, medium, and long term, there will be very little impact to their business because they're able to find other customers. As soon as it hits the boat, it can go around the world. It's just so convenient to send it just a few kilometers down the water to the United States versus overseas to Asia. But they are prepared to find other customers, and that's exactly what they're doing.
Thank you. That concludes today's event.
Thank you.